Good morning and welcome to day 2 of this conference. And we are starting with the second leadership panel today. The topic of this leadership panel is emerging and future risk assessment and perspectives. And we have 5 prominent panelists among us who will be discussing on this topic. Risk in any field is a very dynamic thing. It keeps on changing, it never remains constant. But the requirement for being safe is to be ahead of the risk. If we want to keep our operations safe, if we want to keep ourselves safe, we have to ensure that we are always ahead of the risk. We identify the risks in advance and mitigate them so that they don't get ahead of us. That is the very reason that we need to be looking forward to the emerging risks in this developing industry. If we just look at the oil spills, record of the oil spills in the past, we'll find that the kind of oil spill is changing. It is changing very fast. Earlier we used to have more leaks from tankers, but nowadays we are having more leaks from pipelines. Because the shipping industry has taken quite a few steps for improvement of the vessels, like double hull and other GPS systems, weather monitoring systems. So what has happened is the ship accidents have reduced. However, at the same time, the corrosion in pipelines or the length of pipelines increasing, more fluids being transported by pipelines. So pipeline leakages have increased. So what we are seeing is a dynamic change in the risk profile. Similarly, now we are getting more and more chemicals into the field, which is another emerging risk which is there. Oil industry is moving into deeper seas and also more icy seas, which is another new perspective to the emerging risk. So all these things show that there are a lot of things which we have to look ahead for, and who better than this eminent panel to discuss these things. So to kick off the panel, kick off the discussion, I will start with Mr. D.S. Nanavare, Director Pipelines, Indian Oil Corporation. So being from the downstream and having Indian Oil having installed the first SPM in India in Gulf of Kutch 4 decades ago, Mr. Nanavare, what are your organization's plan to maintain the integrity of aging assets so that no oil spill takes place?
Good morning, everyone. Sir, as you rightly said, we have installed the first SPM in Gulf of Kutch in 1978. And since then, we are operating that offshore facility for supplying crude oil to our 3 of main refineries, which are landlocked refineries. These are the vital installations for us because they are almost 30% of our crude requirement is being transported through this system. After 1978, we have installed one more SPM in 1999, and we are operating these 2 SPMs for meeting our almost 35 to 40 million metric ton crude oil requirement for our 3 refineries at Baroda, Mathura, and Panipat. In order to maintain this critical asset, actually, we have carried out picking up these operations, this system, pipeline system, for which we have laid another loop between SPM1 and SPM2 so that we can start pigging operation from shore, and the pig will be reached again at shore by completing the complete loop. With this, we have carried out ILI of the entire system, the inline inspection, through renowned companies like Rosen, And what we observed is that there are number of pittings inside because of presence of saline water which is accompanying the crude. So over the period, we continued monitoring of our pipelines through ILI system on regular basis. And now we have come to conclusion that these pipelines have lived their life, particularly offshore lines. So we have plans to replace these lines, and we have already awarded this work for replacement of these pipelines, and we will be completing this work by next fair weather window, that is between October to April 23. So this entire job will be carried out in 6 months period, and offshore pipeline along with replacement of SPMs will be done. And this work has been awarded to one of the major companies. We have already done such kind of works in Gulf of Kutch. As far as onshore pipeline is concerned, which is also equally important for all of for us, because they carry the same crude which is transported from SPM. So these pipelines, which are of 42-inch diameter, has already been replaced. So by replacing offshore section and SPM, we will be replacing the entire system, and I hope for the next 20-25 years, we will not have any worry on this part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nanavare. There's one observation that when we talk about oil spills, we talk a lot about oil spills in offshore, oil spills in water. We tend to give the oil spills on land a little less importance comparatively. And here, Mr. Nanavare has brought in a very important point about the on-land pipelines. There are several major spills from on-land pipelines as well. But the importance given to those leakages, on-land leakages, is not as much. And also, I mean, the post-leakage actions to be taken does not get so much importance as offshore leakages or tanker leakages. So it's a good thing that IOC is taking steps towards maintenance of their on-land pipelines to avoid on-land spills. Thank you very much for that perspective. So from downstream perspective, I would now like to move to upstream perspective, and we have with us Mr. Brennan Punapalli from Cairn Oil and Gas, who is here to give us a upstream perspective on current risk of oil spills and the emerging risks for the upstream sector. Mr. Brennan Punapalli.
Yeah, good morning all, and let me take this opportunity to express my thanks to OSI and also the moderator for giving me an opportunity to express my views and perspectives on this topic. Now, from an upstream oil and gas perspective, see, India is on a growth path. Currently, the oil demand is about 5 million barrels oil per day. And if I look at the near future, by 2030, the oil demand is going to shoot up to 7.2 million barrels of oil per day. So that's a 50% jump. If I look at gas currently about 60 billion cubic meters of gas, that is going to double to 120. This is all in a short time frame of currently where we stand, 2022 to 2030. So there is a great thirst in exploration because whatever we find within our country is always beneficial. I will come to the import part later. When I look at from an exploration perspective, the days of easy oil is not there now, okay? We need to challenge ourselves in terms of finding deeper prospects, more challenging and difficult to produce prospects. And that comes with a risk of, oil spills, loss of integrity. These things are emerging, and in future we need to be cognizant of this fact that It will not be easy exploration. It would be tough. It would be in deeper waters. Some HP, or what we call it as high pressure and high temperature wells, this would be drilled. And that comes with its own risk in terms of spills. You know, Mr. Roy, you touched upon asset integrity, and asset integrity from an upstream oil and gas industry is a big risk, I would say, because most of our facilities, if I talk about Kane Oil and Gas, the Rava facility is more than 20 years old. And some of the national companies, the facilities, the trunk lines have gone beyond 30 years plus. And that poses a risk in terms of loss of integrity, maybe pipelines, SPMs, and also facilities. So that's another risk which is high up on the radar. The third risk, and some of my speakers here will also touch upon, that is the transportation risk, because we will bring in a lot of crude from outside. That puts pressure on the existing transportation means. Bigger ships will come to our shores. Also, if you look at gas, there's a lot of LNG being transported. LNG itself, is a new aspect, and in terms of transportation and the risk involved in terms of unfortunately, if there is a collision between an LNG tanker and some of the ongoing ships, then that will create a lot of, from a spill perspective, it is high up on the risk. One point that I want to touch upon here, though it may not be directly related to oil and gas, but the cyber security risk is coming up as, from a future perspective, as a high risk. All our offshore facilities are manned remotely through SCADA, through a lot of control systems and monitoring systems, which are done remotely. And any failure or any break in that system of communication and control would lead to, failure of the safety systems, which could pose a risk in terms of oil spills. So that is, in summary, 4 or 5 risks that are high up on my radar. Mr. Roy, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. So from the operators, from the downstream as well as from the upstream, now I would like to change the track and go to the regulator and bring into this discussion Mr. Arun Mittal, Executive Director, OISD, Oil Industry Safety Directorate. And Mr. Mittal, being a regulator for this industry, what do you think is the regulator's perspective when we look at this existing risks of oil spill, emerging risks, and the assessment per se?
Namaskar. Good morning. I hope everyone understands what OISD is, Oil Industry Safety Directorate. We are regulator for offshore space for the E&P industry. Apart from that, being a technical directorate of Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, we make standards. So we have established 120 standards. We carry out external safety audits. We carry out accident investigation, pre-commissioning safety audits, and workshop seminars, dissemination of knowledge. If I talk of emerging and upcoming risk, the basic risk is fossil fuels. If we see any trend, the decarbonization is one of the big topics. So that itself carries lot many risks, and probably in years to come, maybe in next 30, 40 years, we'll see a lot of decline in the consumption of the crude oil. Nevertheless, the issues are, what we are discussing is the current emerging risk to the oil and gas industry till we are producing it. I will see major 3 issues I will just like to touch upon. First is the contractors management. As we, the industry now relies on contractor to a great extent, even their installations which they have built, they give to a contractor to operate it. Engineering jobs are being done through contractor, rigs are chartered hired. Now, a lot of new operators have come to the industry, and those operators obviously are going to do everything through service companies only. Contract management becomes really very important, and many places we have seen this becomes a gray area. As we investigate the accidents, we find that the contract management, or rather the selection of the contractor, the clauses within that, the bridging document, the HSE compliances, those remains a hazy issue, that remains an issue which needs to be further enhanced. Many places we think we have written in the contract that every responsibility will be of the contractor. But that does not take care. The law of land says that responsibility remains with the operator. So that needs to be kept in mind. Whether you get the job done through a contractor, you have to select a contractor with a good HSC record. There are various methodologies available for that, and quality and cost-based methodology is one of the best methodology where you can give credit to a company which is having a good HSC record, good equipments, good maintenance practices, so on and so forth. Another area which during our investigations and we find during even our audit, we find that the competency gap is increasing. I was part of two major high-level committees where the major disaster happened to oil and gas industry. One was the Baghjan blowout in Assam, and one was the cyclone Taute, where one of the barges and tug, they were capsized. We find that the people, even certificates were forced in some cases. Nowadays it has become easy, so that is another gray area. We find that people are going, the competency gap assessment and the trainings as per the competency is not up to the mark. Because of COVID, I understand that last 2 years there were a lot of online trainings. There are few things which has to be a physical one, like survival at sea and the HUE training. So that needs to be seen how fast the industry can cope up with such exercises. So once you are engaging any contractor, just don't rely on the certificate. Try to see that they are genuine. There are many accredited certificates which can be tracked back, like survival at sea training, that can be tracked back from DG Shipping, as well as if it is OPITO approved, that also can be done. So that is also a necessity nowadays. Competency assessment, gap assessment, and fulfilling that criteria. And thirdly, the safety culture. Still a lot to be done. Companies are trying to do, they are trying to map up their the safety culture or the perception about the safety, and trying to do it. Still the reporting of unsafe act, unsafe conditions is also to be further enhanced. So whether it is your asset integrity, whether it is a pipeline, whatever it is, see, you will get lot many trends, even in pipeline leaks also. And if you are not getting a trend, like in an online pipeline, many times we get a report that a line worker was able to identify a leak. But why our leak detection system has not worked, we have to see that, why we were not able to identify. We get lot many near misses or incidents where it was just observed by someone. But we have a good system of gas detection coupled with even emergency shutdowns. Why that has not worked? Introspection need to be done. Our team, we have a good pipeline team which carry out audit of the entire length and breadth, including offshore pipelines. They are covering around 40,000 kilometers of pipeline and conducting around 10,000, 11,000 kilometers of audit every year. So whatever issues are there, if there is non-compliance to OSD standard, that is being covered. And the companies, they are trying to follow all the requirements laid down in the regulation as well as OSD standards. So I hope by following all those things and developing a culture of reporting unsafe act and conditions, probably things will further get enhanced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittal. Uh, I think we will need to take another turn here and uh, get to another important wing of this industry which has the potential of oil spills, and that is the shipping part. And we have among ourselves Captain Deepak Sachdeva, Chief Executive Officer, SR Bulk Terminal Limited. So I would bring Mr. Sachdeva into the discussion, and I would like to ask him what is his viewpoint from the shipping industry context, where he sees the emerging risks are, and how does he think that they can be mitigated?
Good morning, all. I take this opportunity to thank OSI to have me here. And I want to convey that it's an absolute honor to be amongst this August gathering. Badal sir, the question that you've asked me is not something that I prepared. I made notes on something else. And this is something that I'll just have to speak extempore. About shipping, the risk, emerging risk is, as we rightly mentioned before, that now the risk more is seen from the pipeline and offshore assets because the ships and the movement of the ships is per se controlled and regulated quite a lot under various conventions, under various inspections. There are a lot of inspections which are done before chartering. So from the ship, I would say, I would digress a little. Instead of moving ships, I would go to ships which are engaged for movement of oil in offshore, whether it is our FPSOs or the flotilla that supports. Last year we saw incidents and accidents where SS3 and P305 had an incident, though they didn't result in spill, but then there was a lot of lives which were lost in those two things. So I think regarding the shipping, it's quite regulated now. It's what the first thing that comes to my mind is again on aging of the fleet. That is something that we should see. It requires more inspection. And as you rightly mentioned, it is about competency. Even today, when we interact with the ships and the ship staff, we find the level of training is not something which is desirable. In the sense, there is a room for improvement as far as the level of training of people on board is concerned. So that's all. But I have few other things to say, which actually I had prepared, which is part of this discussion of ours.
No, I think if you have something more to say, a little different, you can go ahead and say.
Okay. Thank you very much. Because I was actually taking notes from what we were saying. Mr. Badal, as you rightly said, the risk is dynamic and it's keep changing. Yeah, that was your opening line. I would like to bring about something, a known static risk. And what are we doing about it? It is something for all of us to ponder. The static risk which I'm talking about is the abandoned pipelines, the abandoned subsea pipelines. Who is responsible for the abandoned pipelines and offshore assets? You also mentioned, sir from OSD mentioned that the operator is responsible. Who is responsible after something has been capped and abandoned? How do you abandon? What are the processes? What are the procedures? What are the trainings behind it? Are we on top of it? I believe it's not only a pollution risk, not only an environmental risk. Any abandoned facility offshore is also a security threat. So we need to see it holistically. Also, as my colleague from Kane said, that we are moving into deeper waters. Deeper water requires newer technologies, newer techniques. The conventional way of doing E&P would undergo a change. How ready are we for that? And as we keep moving deeper, what happens to the assets which have lived their life and which are not viable anymore? How do we abandon them? So that is something that I want to leave for discussion here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Badal, shall I reply on that part?
Sure.
Because there are certain
Yes.
questions to it. If a field, now if it has, its useful life is over, a decommissioning is required to be done for that particular field. And for that, there are specific guidelines, SRG guidelines are there. The companies currently also some 3-4 fields are under decommissioning at this stage. And as per the guidelines, how the wells have to be plugged back, what they have to do for the pipelines, what they have to do for the other infrastructure that's also laid down, and they have to take approval from OSD for that purpose. And that's being taken care of.
Okay. We are discussing risks of oil spill. And whenever we discuss about oil spills, whether risks, emerging risks, risk mitigation, none of these discussions is complete without getting the ICG into the discussion. And so, we also have a person from ICG here, Indian Coast Guard, Commander Ashish Sharma is with us. I surely feel that without taking Indian Coast Guard's perspective, or without listening to Indian Coast Guard's perspective, no discussion about an oil spill can be complete. So, Commandant Ashish Sharma, I'll take you to a different type of risk. See, in these coastal areas, if we see nowadays, the demography is very fast changing. There is a lot of urbanization in the coastal areas, and the population seems to be increasing a lot. So, do you think because of this, there are emerging risks? And how do you think those risks can be mitigated?
Thank you so much for your question. Before I answer this, I would like to convey our sincere gratitude to OSI for conducting this wonderful seminar. Coming to your query, sir, I think you and we all agree that 80% or so marine pollution, whatever comes to our oceans, is land-based pollution. It starts from land, and then on the way through rivers and different estuaries, different water bodies, it reaches oceans. Coastal areas are we understand, high sites of biological productivity. Having said that, we also know one of the very important cases like Minamata disease, which happened in Japan. And that this disease spread because of the leakage of mercury into the coastal waters, which was detected after a decade or so when people started feeling sick. So that's a way coastal pollution makes an impact on the oceans. Having said that, I'll just get you some statistics now. Our 40% of the world population is living within the 100 kilometers from the coasts. And especially when I come to India, coastal population of India is presently around 170 million. And out of that, 1 billion people occupy land less than 10 meters above high current tide line. So you can understand the kind of coastal impact which India is facing right now. More than that, now there is another impact, maybe due to climate change, which is sea level rise. And another statistics to that is that in past 50 years, India has witnessed a sea level rise of 8.5 centimeters. Days are not far when our most pristine area, which is the Sundarban Delta, is going to be immersed in under the sea because part of Sundarban is sinking at the rate of 2 to 4 millimeters per year. So these are the some statistics which goes for the coastal pollution and how this coastal pollution is arising. This coastal pollution is rising because of the mainly land-based pollution is being carried through so many cities, through waterways, different waterways, and finally it ends up in ocean. And general public mindset is that ocean is a dump yard. You keep on dumping, nothing is going to happen. But there are a lot of risks and these consequences which are actually impacting our coastal lives and in fact our life on land also. There are many governing policies, but then we need to have some legislations which are binding in force, not only at sea. At sea, we have so many conventions coming from IMO, then some regional treaties are there, followed by some national agreements amongst the industry regulators, as we have already discussed. How do we make an impact? How do we control all this? Especially when we talk about upstream, as we were discussing, as my panelists were discussing about upstream and downstream. So upstream, how do we control this? There are three ways which, as per my understanding, goes. One is action at source, action on the way, and action at sink. So action at source is general public has to be taught about the use and like now we have a big problem which is plastic. So this we need to make public aware. We need to have some kind of incentives, some kind of seminars, workshops, even on land also. Now there are UN Sustainable Development Goals. SDG 14 talks about life underwater. And we need to achieve these goals by 2030. So this life underwater, how do we control pollution and the life underwater? This will happen only when we take care of all this pollution which is coming from land. And we take care of this pollution at source only. And how do we do that? That is, as I've said, conducting some kind of seminars or workshops, plus sensitizing public through media. So in that way, actually, Sustainable Development Goal 14 is contributing towards Sustainable Development Goal 15, which is life on land. So both are actually interrelated to each other. And when we come to action on the way is putting some kind of waste traps, putting some kind of waste treatment plants. But then as we move from action at source to action on the way, the costs, if we go by the cost and benefit analysis, the cost rises. And it is harmful for the human environment as well as our coastal environment also. And when we come to action at sink, that is when this pollution is reaching oceans, then obviously it is very difficult, as we all know that oceans cover 70% of the earth. And do you really think, is it possible for us to put some kind of traps and start cleaning our oceans, which we continue to do as of now? But then I believe it is a very challenging task and it is very, very costly. So we need to think on these three terms: action at source, action on the way, and action at the sink. Similarly, when we come to offshore, when there is some oil leakage from ships or some pipelines or some kind of OHS, I think we again need to focus on this thing. How do we take action at source? That is, if ship has spilled oil, what we need to do, rather than calling out Indian Coast Guard or other regulators. I think it's better to go for SOPAP, which is already there, plan is in force on board ships. So immediately what can be done is to immediately implement SOPAP and start taking action. And when it is on the way, obviously regulators or the response agencies will take care of that. But then again, as I said, cost and benefit analysis, costs keep on increasing as soon as it goes away. And action at sink, when it reaches ashore, it is very difficult to control, as we have witnessed during various oil spill cases whenever oil has reached shore. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to touch upon another major risk so far as onshore, on-land pipelines are concerned, major risk with respect to oil spill, and that is the pilferage from the trunk lines. We all know that pilferage from the trunk lines is a major reason why oil spills on land happens, and these are very common. The pilferage cases are very common. In fact, I think recently there was a pilferage case in Mathura in our IOC pipeline. So I would like to ask Mr. Nanavare that since this is a very common phenomena, these pilferages, and since you have cross-country pipelines all over the country, how do you tackle such challenges?
It's really a pertinent question, because Indian Oil is operating around more than 15,000 kilometers of pipelines in India and transnational pipelines to Nepal also. Before answering this question, let me tell you brief about the risk involved in pipeline per se. So there are at every stage of pipeline, right from concept to commissioning and then operation of these pipelines, there is a risk involved in each stage. At the time of concept, whenever we are doing feasibility surveys and all those things, we need to identify a route in such a way that we are not encountering any of those problems in future, so that our pipeline becomes a target for that. Similarly, while designing the pipeline, there are aspects which are required to be taken care of, particularly because India is a very populous country. On all our standards are based upon API or American standards we follow. Their population is sparse. In our country, like whenever we are designing any pipeline, thickness of the pipeline is based upon the population density index. And the sectionalizing walls are based upon the PDI, that is population density index. Consider the standard which is based upon American Institute and the population which we are having, density of population which we are having in India. So it's not matching that. So first of all, we'll have to discuss this issue in detail at our institutions, where we have to find out the solutions for this. Because I feel that in India, class 1, particularly for population density, should not be there at all. Because in the future, it's going to be converted to class 2 immediately because of a spread of population. So while designing this, we have decided that we will not go for any class 1 locations as of now. Immediately, we will be considering that class 1 location to class 2 so that thickness of pipe is increased accordingly. So risk is mitigated at the design stage itself. Otherwise, what we'll have to do, we'll have to, in future for operation of the pipelines, we'll have to then reduce the pressure of that pipeline. We have to derate the pipeline because of these conditions. Another issue is that surge pipelines, surge in a pipeline, which is basically a very, very risk involved in this particular aspect. Because any surge created in a pipeline, particularly in liquid pipeline, is very hazardous to health of the pipeline. So for that matter also, we need to design, have a perfect system in that. During further execution, nowadays what we are finding is that material is a concern. Supplier of materials is a big concern for all of us. Pipe, walls, everywhere we are finding certain lacunas and which are creating problem while operating the pipelines. So having good quality material for pipelines is also one of the very, very big requirement which will avoid risk in future. Another aspect is execution of the pipelines, where if you don't follow the SOPs, don't follow the standards, where standard procedures are given, then also we'll end up in a non-standard job or quality is compromised. Further, having a good contractor is also a big aspect for all the pipeline operators. And the last one is during operation of the pipeline, because of product qualities, maybe water in the product, we are having internal corrosion of the pipelines or residual water during construction, which has not been properly drained or pipe has not been dried properly. That also causes internal corrosion of the pipeline, which leads to leakage of the pipelines. So these are the few risks which are involved, and we are required to identify those and mitigate those risks in advance. So as far as this particular incident which has happened, it's really unfortunate instance. Indian Oil Corporation Limited takes utmost care for operation of these pipelines. What has happened is that this is one of the incidents where a tunnel has been created around 60 meters from the pipeline. And that tunnel is 10 feet wide tunnel and 10 feet depth. That 10 by 10 feet tunnel was constructed from 60 meter away from the right of way. And that particular gentleman has, who was there actually, that pilferer, they have, in the guise of factory for producing thermocol, that land was taken on hire basis, factory was created there, and they were transporting thermocol through the trucks or tankers for initial few days, giving a belief to the nearby people that this factory produces thermocol and there is nothing wrong in that. Our own people who were walking all along the pipelines, those persons also have seen those things. They have not find anything wrong. But after certain period, that particular gang has created a pilfer that drained. They have drilled the pipeline and laid the small 1-inch dia pipeline, which was covered through a coating tape which is used to not to identify any material, particularly steel material. So the entire thing was done in a very systematic manner, and that particular, I think that they were having good technology about having pilferage particularly. Subsequently, when they were taking crude oil, they were taking crude in a 200-liter tank, small drums. And they were taking crude in such a rate that it cannot be detected through our leak detection system. Leak detection system generally is identify the leak up to 2% or up to maximum 3% of the flow rate which is going through the pipeline. So our pipeline was having flow rate of around 1200 kl per hour. But they were taking the crude with such a small rate that cannot be detected by the leak detection system. So all these activities could not be detected even though we have got a leak detection system, we have got a physical patrolling by line patrolmen, officer patrolling, and then DGR patrolling. Despite of all these things, we could not identify this because of these two aspects. One is the rate at which they were drawing the crude. Another is that they have tunnel below the ground from 60 meters away from the right of way. So any activity which is above the ground can be easily identified by the people who are walking along the pipeline. But this was underground, so it could not be. And most of their activities were done during the night time. So our people were not able to detect those things in that particular area. But one day that when drawing the crude oil, there was a fire in that particular factory. Then police and all municipal corporation people came with their tender and they tried to douse that fire. But because it was coming from the crude oil, the fire could not be put off. Then they called Indian Oil Corporation Limited. Then when our people reached the site, they could find out that this fire is because of crude oil, because of seeing the color of the whatever stack was coming out. Then they stopped the pipeline operation, isolated the section, immediately that fire was put off. Once we started checking all those things, how this crude oil has come to this place, then we have tracked back, entire tunnel was observed, and then we have entered into tunnel and gone up to the pipeline. There we found that there was one small drain was there with the 1-inch pipe. So this particular aspect is really it cannot be detected by human who are walking on the pipeline ROW. Even we are seeing that there are tunnels across our borders also. So those activities cannot be detected by human beings who are walking along that. Now what we are doing is now, so in order to avoid such incidences in future, so we are now taking the help of a technology which is called PIDWS, Pipeline Intrusion Detection and Warning System. This is basically a OFC-based system. You know that OFC, which is laid along the pipeline, will detect any vibration caused by movement of human, movement of animal, movement of equipment, or whatever it is. So any movement on right of way will be tracked by that OFC, and which will be signal will be given back to the control room. So that system is being operated. We have started this system in our pipelines, and around 4,000 kilometers of pipeline has already been provided this system, where we are not finding any pilferage as of now. Balance 11,000 kilometer pipelines are in progress and will be completing entire activity of this PIDWS by 2023. Once this system is in place, we'll be having another foolproof system for that will be keeping a control system with a quick response team at every 100 kilometers. That system will monitor, that control room will monitor entire this PIDWS activities, and anything which is abnormal or any alarm which is abnormal, immediately drones will be used to go at the particular locations and take a picture of that, and that picture will be transmitted to that control room particularly, and then immediately that quick response team will go to the site to check those pilferages. So this way we feel that in future we'll be mitigating this risk, which is really hazardous, because anything goes wrong with this system, if a pilferage goes wrong, this is a real hazard for localities available nearby or any property available nearby, besides loss of fuel or crude oil. So that's why we are really concerned about this particular aspect, and we are taking foolproof arrangements for reducing this, and or finally will be terminating this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much about giving the insight about the pipeline risks and the way you are trying to mitigate them. Like I told you earlier, that the spill profile, oil spill profile of late has changed quite a lot, and most of the spills now we are having are from pipelines, and so it becomes imperative for the industry to take care of the pipelines holistically, in the sense, like you said, right from design stage to asset integrity management and taking care of spills through the pilferage as well. Thank you for that insight. I think it's time to throw the house open for questions. So I would invite questions from participants for the panelists. So anybody who has a question for the panelists can raise his hand and ask a question.
Hello. Yeah, very good morning. I am Naveen Raj from Oil Industry Safety Directorate. And I had seen this panel talking a very wide things by all the participants, from ship to the Coast Guard point of view. Even I appreciate that Coast Guard in oil spill, what we generally talk, they deviated and they have brought a very valuable issue, that the pollution because of the river transportation through from on land, and which ultimately leads to the oil spill on land, which may lead through this, and ultimately it is the main cause. Commandant Sharma has raised this thing, that there should be some regulation. So I would just like, because nobody is here from the Ministry of Environment, but there are all the regulations, especially after 2016. It is being implemented and being enforced. As you talk of this, under hazardous waste management rules, under e-waste management rule 2016, under construction demolition waste management rule, solid waste management rule, and plastic waste management rule. So all these are being emphasized. And as far as carrying the pollutants through river is concerned, so you know this Clean Ganga and Clean all those projects, these are the priorities of the government right now. So ultimately things are there, and recently this plastic waste rule has been implemented. The thing is that because we are not having the support system, so it's taking time. But it has been banned and things are being improving. And regarding this pipeline theft issue, I'll just in a lighter way, I can say that the risk management competency of those thieves, at least they needs an applaud. The way they are doing this and the way they have done, they are not less than the competent person from oil industry. Regarding Mr. Mittal, you have brought out all the
Any
issues.
questions, please, questions. It's becoming too long. There are other people.
Okay, so my question is only this, can you tell something about what OISD is doing for the oil spill management through audits and all?
As I said before, OISD is the competent authority for offshore, and there is a specific rule, Petroleum and Natural Gas Safety in Offshore Operations Rule 2008. Currently, that rule is also under amendment. A team is working, and we are looking into means to further strengthen the environment management in that particular rules. Nevertheless, already our teams, when they go for audit, the basic intent is the asset integrity. If pipeline is old, now as told by many of the panelists, there are pipelines which are now more than 30 to 40 years old. So there are specific guidelines. If pipeline is more than 25 years, then the guidelines to maintain the asset integrity, the ILI's level, the different corrosion monitoring levels. In some of the accident incident, we have seen that during the design stage, probably the crude which was envisaged was not having that much of H2S, CO2 or the water content, and by the time it matures or maybe down the line, the things now more and more sour crude is coming, more corrosive fluid is there. So corrosion, whether through the pigging, through the analysis of the pig residue, whether the necessary actions are being taken for the corrosion inhibitor in the pipelines, the CP system. So companies are doing their bit in all those things. If it is a non-piggable pipeline, it's basically from, there are a lot of E&P operators, they lay flow lines from the well to a group gathering stations and a feeder line from a group gathering stations to a central tank farm. And many of these lines are generally not non-piggable. So again, there is a specific standard for maintaining the non-piggable pipelines. Our teams, they focus to identify whether all those integrity measures are being taken off, if any report has come out, whether the actions have been taken care of, and the companies try to implement. To my knowledge, there have been no major oil spill reported in offshore from last many years. So again, the industry needs a kudos for that. And I hope they will maintain asset integrity to that level and to avoid any major oil spill. Thank you.
Yes.
Sir, I'm N.N. Ray from IPSOM Goa. First of all, I thank Dr. Nanave for his excellent presentation. Sir, my question to you is that, as you mentioned this leak detection system based on vibration monitoring. So, is it capable of detecting the leaks which are caused due to corrosion, not by anybody who is drilling the pipeline, but suppose on its own there is a leakage because of pitting in the pipelines. So does this technology is capable of addressing that issue, detecting it? Thank you, sir.
Any leakage because of corrosion, maybe if it is in the form of seepage, it cannot be detected by any system. The rate of leak will be very small. So it's real trouble for the pipeline operators if such leakages are there. But now we are using technology that is called negative pressure wave. That technology is able to detect those small leakages also, and which is being used wherever we are not finding such leakages through our LDS. So we are using this technology to identify those. And this is very particular for those pipelines where they are non-piggable. We cannot introduce pigs in those pipelines. So nowadays we are relenting on, particularly on this negative pressure wave technology. That is really helpful for identifying very small leakages also.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? I think there's nobody else. So I think we are coming to the conclusion of this session. I really thank all the panelists for contributing and enlightening all of us on such an important subject. We have really come to the conclusion that there are certain very significant emerging risks which needs to be addressed, and the answer lies with the industries. Of course, prevention. See, basically, we have different agencies coming in and helping out once a spill occurs, but the responsibility of preventing spills is with the industry, and hence identification of risks, the present risk as well as the emerging risk is, and taking steps to mitigate those risks is with the industry. So it is the responsibility of the industry to prevent risk, because it is best to prevent rather than control. So with this, I'll thank everyone else and all the audience here. Thank you very much.
Oil Spill India 2022 is dedicated to the Honorable Prime Minister's Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and Clean Seas.